Hey everybody, Mike here with Delta Faucet. If you're planning a bathroom renovation or even doing new construction, a new shower and wall set can make all the difference, and it's a project we can help you tackle. Now, keep in mind building codes are different everywhere. Also, if there's a task that seems a little bit beyond your ability, we definitely recommend contacting a professional for some additional help. You can also make sure you're totally comfortable with all of these steps by reviewing this video before fully diving in. It's also good to know that this really is a two-person job because there are certainly some steps along the way that require an extra set of hands. Now, before we get started, we want to make sure you're watching the right video. Let's confirm a few things. First, take a look at your installation booklet or packaging to confirm what series you've selected. Now, this video will cover a shower base in Delta's EverEdge series. Today, we're installing a 48 by 34 inch shower base. Note that the shower base in this video may look a little different when I get into the step-by-step process, but don't worry, all of the installation steps will be the same. Finally, if you're pairing a matching wall set with your shower, make sure the components are also part of the EverEdge series. If all of those things check out, then you're watching the right video. Now, before starting any plumbing related project, it's always a good idea to go ahead and shut off the water supply, so be sure to do that before you start the install. Next, let's collect the tools and supplies we may need to complete this installation. Those include a drill, safety glasses, caulk gun, adhesive, sealant, a tape measure, a level, a Carpenters Square, Shims, drop cloths, a pencil, a driver bit, mortar, a bit holder extension, a 3/16 inch drill bit, 1¼ inch stainless or zinc plated truss head screws, 1/2 inch square notch trowel, and some gloves. Okay, you're also going to need a shower drain assembly. Now, it's not included with this model, so get a standard shower drain with a 4¼ inch strainer. Now, a little pro tip here, you may want to make sure that the drain finish coordinates with your trim finish. Okay, with all that out of the way, let's get started.
The first step we're going to do is make sure that our walls are plumb and square and that our subfloor is level.
So to make sure our walls are plumb, I'm going to use my long level here, placing it flat along each one of my framing locations, making sure I have good even contact and also that nice and plumb. Now I'm going to continue the same steps around each one of my framing locations, making sure everything looks good in my opening. Second, I want to make sure my opening is square. So to do this, I'm going to use my Carpenters Square. I want to start at the bottom here in the back corner, place it along my bottom plates, making sure I have good even contact along the side and the back of my Carpenters Square. I also think it's a good idea to go ahead and check about halfway up your opening as well. Again, just to confirm that the entire opening is plumb and square. Now, once you check the other side and everything's looking good, you can go ahead and move on. However, if anything looks a little bit out of whack and needs to be adjusted, now's the time to make those adjustments because it's going to make your life a lot easier and make sure that the install goes smoothly down the road.
Okay, now we're going to check to make sure our subfloor is level. So I've got a shorter level here. I'm going to check our back, making sure that the bubble is in between the lines. I'm going to check both sides. Okay, and check the front. Okay, that looks good. If yours at home is out of level, you can apply a mortar bed in a later step. Okay, we're ready to move on. Now we're going to dry fit our base. So we're going to slide it into our opening, making sure that it's evenly contacting the back and both sides. Now we're going to grab a pencil and mark the location of our pilot holes. So I'm going to make a mark in the center of the flange at each one of our stud locations.
Now, one thing I want to point out is we want to make sure that we have a connection point along the front edge of our shower base. So in our instance here, we added this little bit of additional blocking to make sure we had that spot to secure our base to our framing. Now, if you're installing a wall set down the road, that's going to have its own requirements for some additional framing that we're going to add later. Just make sure you review the instructions to make sure any blocking we add now isn't going to interfere with those framing requirements down the road. If you're all set, we can go ahead and mark those locations on the front edge of the shower base on each side.
Now we're going to trace an outline of the front of our shower base. This is going to give us a reference line in a later step when we go to apply our adhesive or mortar bed. You also want to trace the outline of your drain. Okay, now we can go ahead and pull our base out and drill our pilot holes. All right, I've gone ahead and pulled my base out so that I don't damage any of my studs when drilling my pilot holes. I've got a 3/16 inch bit and an extended bit holder to make sure that the chuck of my drill doesn't damage my shower base. I'm gonna drill a pilot hole at each one of our marked locations.
Next, we're gonna cut the hole for our rough plumbing. Now I wanna make sure this hole is large enough to accommodate the shower drain we selected, but also no bigger than 5 inches in diameter. Once everything looks good, I'm gonna go ahead and center my hole over that location we traced during the dry fit phase. And once everything looks good, go ahead and drill your hole. All right, now that I have my hole cut, I can go ahead and clean up the space and move on to the next step. All right, so we've moved on and installed the drain into our shower base. Now to do this, I followed the instructions provided by the drain manufacturer. But one thing I want to point out is making sure that we don't use plumber's putty to make the connection between the drain and the shower base itself, because the plumber's putty can cause damage to the base. Also, I verified my rough plumbing is in the right location and at the right height for the drain I've selected. In this next step, I'm going to be dry fitting my base and my drain into my opening one last time, verifying that everything's coming together the way I want, because this is going to be our last opportunity to make any fine-tune adjustments. And to that end, I think it's a great idea to go ahead and pop off the grate if you have a removable one on the drain you've chosen, because it makes it that much easier to look down through your drain and verify everything's coming together exactly how we want it. So, once everything looks great, let's go ahead and dry fit our base into our opening one last time. Okay, I've got my shower base dry fit for the final time. Now there's 2 things I'm going to check for. First, making sure that my rough plumbing and my drain are coming together perfectly to form a nice watertight connection. And then secondly, I also want to make sure my shower base is still sitting tight to my subfloor and that the drain isn't getting in the way. If everything looks good, I'm going to pull the shower base back out, and then we're going to move on to the next step of adhering the base to the floor. All right, now we can move on to adhering our shower base. So to do this, you have 2 options. The first, if your alcove is perfectly level, is using a construction adhesive. The second, if your alcove is slightly out of level, is where you'd want to use a mortar bed to ensure that your shower base is going to sit perfectly flat during final installation. Either way, we want to make sure we're getting good, even coverage throughout the alcove itself, not extending past that reference line we drew in the earlier step. Now, as a little bit of a pro tip, I find it's easy to add some painter's tape just along the line to make sure we hit it exactly. Now for my application, I'm going to be using the construction adhesive. So I'm going to use a 1/2 inch notch trowel to evenly spread the adhesive throughout my alcove and then set my shower base. So if you're ready, let's get to it. Okay, so I've evenly spread my adhesive throughout my alcove and also removed my painter's tape. So I'm just about ready to set my shower base. Before I do that though, I also want to make sure I've applied any required cement to all of my rough plumbing connections as well as my drain, so when all of this comes together, it makes a permanent watertight seal. So, if you've done all that and you're ready, let's go ahead and get to it. Now as I lower my shower base, I want to make sure that not only is my shower base fully pushed back within my alcove, but also that my rough plumbing is coming together perfectly with my drain. So again, I'm going to look down through my drain hole to ensure that I'm getting a perfect connection. All right, my connection with my drain looks great and I'm fully pushed back within my alcove. So the last thing I want to check is to ensure that my shower base is level. To do this, I'm going to use my level, place it along the back of my shower base, right along the deck on each side, and then finally also the front. Okay, everything's looking great and level, so I can go ahead and move on to the next step. All right, now that we've let the adhesive cure according to the manufacturer's instructions, we can move on to securing our shower base to our rough framing. Now, you'll see the first thing that I've done is to put a piece of cardboard in the bottom of my base here, not only to protect the finish, but also to make sure that I don't drop anything down the drain. Now the screws I'm gonna be using are 1.25 inches long, and they're truss or pan head screws. Also, you'll notice that I'm using an extended drill bit holder on my drill here. That way, it gives me a little bit more leeway so that the spinning chuck of the drill doesn't come in contact with the shower base, which could cause a little bit of damage. And when I'm securing these screws, I want to make sure that I'm not over tightening them. They just need to be snug enough to hold the flange of the shower base firmly to the wood framing behind. And lastly, as you're working your way around the opening, be sure to keep a close eye on any gaps between the flange and the framing behind. If you see any gap that's greater than, say, 1/8 of an inch, You want to use a wood shim, carefully drop it down to close that gap between the flange and the wood framing before securing the screw. Okay, so with all that said and all that in mind, let's go ahead and move on, working our way around the opening, securing our shower base to our rough framing. All right, I've got my screws all secured into place, and I've scored and snapped off any shims I may have used. So at this point, that about wraps up the installation, but there is one final step that comes after your finished floors and your finished walls are in place. So once your finished floors are in place, you want to make sure you add a bead of sealant along the front edge between the seam of the shower base and the finished floors from side to side. And on the finished walls, if you're using something other than the matching wall set, something like tile, be sure to add a bead of sealant between the seam of the walls to the shower base, all along the inside here as well.
All right, that wraps up this portion of the installation.
And as always, if you have any additional questions, you can always reach out to the Delta Faucet customer service team. They're more than happy to help.